for people who don't know exactly what the book is. So it's called Story Cities, a City Guide for the Imagination, and it's got 51 very short stories, flash fiction, written by 42 writers. And the idea of the book was to just create a kind of compendium of different perspectives, different kind of moments in the city. So I've been interested for a long time in the relationship between writing and place. There's a quote from Michel de Certeau in his book, The Practice of Everyday Life. He talks about walking around the city, and he says, haunted places are the only places people can live in. You know, so kind of turn away the haunted place would be a scary place. But no, what he's saying is storied places, places that are haunted with memory, with the lives of people who've been there already, things that you remember, stories that relate to things other people have said, to the history of a place, but also even just the lives of people who are living there now. I think it's quite hard for people to live in a place that no one else lives as well. I mean, in a city, anyway, maybe in the middle of the country, but in a city is all about the other people. And I really liked that really kind of resonated with me, that idea of the storied place. And so I was interested in that for a long time, but it was, this idea that actually they could be portable, transportable. So rather than just reading a piece about London or about Paris or about France, it would be something a little bit more open. And also, you know, the idea that, so if you read it as a tourist, that's different from if you read it in your own city. So if you're taking this around the city that you live, maybe you'd see different things in the city that's very familiar to you. But if, as a tourist, you're taking it to a place you've never seen before, in a way, the idea would be that these stories would kind of connect you to the city in a different way and allow you to make it your own by reading the story, sitting in a cafe and reading a story, or sitting in a square and reading a story there. So that's why we called it a city guide for the imagination, because obviously if you go to a different city, you have to take a city guide with you. But the idea being that maybe learning about landmarks or particular buildings or the official history of a city isn't necessarily the best way in. And actually sitting in a cafe, going to a restaurant, wandering around the streets, sitting in the square, are the ways that you really get to know a city. And so the book was kind of designed to help you do that by giving you a reason to sit in the square, because you can read.
It's that license, we tried it. It's almost this idea of permission, and I think we discussed this quite early on, was that the idea of, I think the tourist is something I've been really interested in myself, in that the state that you feel in when you're a tourist is very different to a regular sort of encounter in the city. You know, you have a purpose, but it's very much, you're more open to things, and you're inviting things to occur in a much more friendly, sort of more open way. And so this idea of this being lost was quite exciting. This idea that you would stumble upon things, and having this companion with you, this almost sort of passport for this global citizen, that you would encounter things quite freely, quite openly, but it would be something that you're connected to perhaps. And this idea of having time, we all sort of try and relate to that. I want more time to do things, I want more time to read, I want more time to sort of be in a leisure space perhaps, is we wanted to give people that sort of a bit of time. So you can be standing at a crosswalk, and very quickly there's a little story you can encounter, and then off you are, you're on your way. And so these little pockets or moments we wanted to encourage to bring readership into that. And this idea of a sort of global traveller, global citizen, you're encountering cities which have familiar things, objects, and situations as well. But so there are familiar things which connect every city, but then there's also things which are more regional, more specific to those locations, which are unique to those places. So this idea that you're perhaps able to make those connections and see those things more openly, more readily.
Yeah, and one of the things about that was that the structure of the book, as soon as we got this guidebook idea, and right from the word go, there were themes, and the themes were all very concrete. They were streets and places, they were not people. And my initial, I got my back up a little bit initially. I was like, come on, it's the people that make the city.
You pitched it to Jerry.
Mind you, I have to say this, they pitched this by turning up at London Book Fair without an appointment.
Yes.
And it was so noisy, I could barely hear what they were saying. And so it's like, let's take this, you know.
So you misunderstood what we said?
No, I didn't. But it was a case of, there's enough here that's catching my interest that I'm prepared to have another meeting somewhere we can hear each other.
Oh yes, because there were those
we were right by the readings, and it was, and we're just, I mean, it's like being in an aircraft hangar anyway. And actually, it's also a bit like being in an airport terminal, and that sort of fitted quite well with what we were trying to do with the book. So it was quite a sort of good introduction to it. But it meant that when we were structuring it, we did structure it as though it was essentially a rough guide. So I said, okay, so there has to be an introduction to this non-existent place that we're taking people. So you can write an introduction. And then we'll start with how you get into the city, and then where do you stay, and then where do you go once you go out, where do you eat? And so we did it like that. And we were quite anxious that we would get enough stories for each of these sections. But actually, when it came to it, what was more important that we were getting enough different voices and enough different takes on the city. So we ended up only one market story in the book, which is astonishing. We got quite a lot of market stories, but only one of them was exactly right, and it absolutely was what we were looking for. No, but it's such a good market story. It's fine. We can just have one. You know, so there were all sorts of weird conversations we were having in the process about how to fit what we got from the call out into the concept without it being too much of a shoehorn.
Yeah, and I mean, yes, I think that maybe that's a good time to talk a bit more about that process, because as Cherry said, we had this idea of these various places that you find in every city. So ports, stations, hotels, cafes, main streets, side streets, markets. So the idea would be that those would be the connecting threads, as Cam said, so that whatever city you went to, there would be one of those places, and if you went there, you could read a story about that, and that would be how each city would kind of connect to the stories wherever you were. And we had these rules as well, as Jane pointed out, and that basically we realised quite early on, Cam and I wrote quite a few stories, but we realised that for this to work, for it to be a real multiple perspective, kind of compound picture of the city, we needed to have lots of writers. So we wanted to get a lot of other people involved, and so we kind of set up these rules where we said, okay, so these are the themes, so write to one of those themes, and then you can't use proper names, you can't use give your characters names, because that tends to link it too closely to a particular country. No, you can't name the city, can't name any landmarks that relate to that city, and also other things like currencies and things like that, because that became a bit problematic.
There's just so many identifiers.
So we didn't specify all these things, but when the stories came in, we were like, oh well, that's a bit, but then that's quite easy to adjust. But we really didn't know quite what we would get, because we had quite a strong concept and a framework, and we put that out in a call for submissions, which we hoped we got across to people. And then we just got a whole range of stories back, and most of the stories did manage to kind of fit those principles of having that anonymity, that sort of universality. And if they didn't, they could be tweaked a bit. But what was really interesting, I think, was that the stories were quite varied. So my idea, Cam's idea, was that these stories would be quite open, so that they would have that openness, so that you could sit in a cafe or a square, or in a side street, and there would be an openness in the story that would allow the place that you were in to complete it. So a lot of my stories were a little bit more abstract, whereas the range of stories that we got in, some of them were complete little stories with the main character and a very clear narrative. Some of them were more like poems. Some of them were just
one of them is a poem.
Yeah.
We don't care. It's so good.
And then some are more like moments that are just like an instant that something happens, a little epiphany. So they're very varied, the style of them.
But the beginning of that, the incompleteness, was something that we wanted to really sort of keep a hold of, so that it's about as much the reader brings something to this project as much as we were putting out there through the book. So this idea of leaving something incomplete or available for interpretation was something which was a thread throughout, including in the design process. We didn't want to be so sort of specific with what we were trying to do with this. And actually, with Cherry coming into this too, the three of us had slightly perhaps different ideas about what this thing was. And I think everyone who submitted probably has a different idea of what they're submitting to. So hopefully what we end up with is a collection of things which are complete in that they are held together in a physical thing, and they are held together within a concept, but they're open enough that it allows room for interpretation. I think that was quite vital. It's almost sort of not completing the triangle. We wanted that sort of openness to be there.
Yeah, one of the things that came up in editing was that we were getting a lot of what Rosamund was calling archetypes, and I was calling cliches. And we had quite a big ding-dong about one particular story, which was beautifully written, but I said, no, I'm sorry, I'm not accepting this story. I get sent a story like this for every single anthology, regardless of what the theme is. I'm not having it. I'm sorry, it is a cliche on a stick.
So we need an anthology of cliches.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I've got boring. And they'd all be that book. They'd all be that story.